right. First off, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Really appreciate it. And we're really excited to have you here. And I am Brad Gordon. I'm a graduate student in the Water Resources Science graduate program here at the University of Minnesota. And I was picked to do the quick introduction because I missed the meeting where they chose who the speaker was. So take note, lesson learned. But yeah, so I'm speaking on behalf of WRSIA, that's Water Resources Students in Action, and we are the student group for the Water Resources Science graduate program. And we have opportunities to network, hang out as a program, and to volunteer in the community through like garbage cleanups, river cleanups, cottonwood plantings, those sorts of things, and then hosting professional development events, kind of like this one. And so we really appreciate all of you guys coming, commissioners and directors from agencies speaking for behalf of the state, and for Anna coming as well, speaking with, for the governor tonight. And just as a student group, we really appreciate it that you guys were willing to come out here. And yeah, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Peter Kalo, who is a professor in the Humphrey School of Public Affairs and a professor with the Water Resources Science program.
Well, thanks, Brad, and the student group for actually making this happen. I mean, it's a really important topic, and the area is extremely timely to discuss. So thanks to them for bringing us all together and creating this opportunity. As Brad says, I'm Peter Kalo. I'm from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs. I'm in the Science, Technology, Environmental Protection part of that program. And we, together with the Water Resources Centre, are very pleased to be able to sponsor this event this evening. The director of the Water Resources Centre is sitting on the front row, Jeff Peterson. He'll join us in a little bit to moderate the questions and answers, and then Jeff will introduce himself to you. Talking of questions and answers, I think I need right up front to draw your attention to how we're going to manage this. So you have programs in front of you, and in there there's a hashtag, and this is one of those very few occasions when we're actually going to encourage you to use mobile phones during the presentations in silent mode to raise your questions. And the reason that we're doing this is you can't see it, but we are being live streamed to the world at large, and in particular to groups of students and colleagues around the university system. And so what we want to do is to give everybody an opportunity to raise questions through this hashtag process, and they will have the hashtag in front of them on the live stream program. The master of tweets will be Jeff Peterson, and so when he returns, he'll tell you how we're going to operate the questions and answers. There can't be any of us in this room who are not really proud to be living in a state where there are so many water bodies that we can't count them precisely, and to live in a state where there are the iconic Mississippi River and the Lake Superior. That said, I'm sure many of us are surprised and concerned to find that at least, well, nearly 50% of those water bodies are impacted in some kind of way by human activity. And I'm sure that was the rationale behind Governor Mark Dayton's call for a year of water action, as a wake-up call, if you like, to us all to take joint responsibility for this important joint resource. And that's the nature of the theme of the discussion that we're going to have today. It's been very good to be able to bring this group of panelists from the agencies together to give their thoughts on this. And I'll come back to them in a little bit, in a few moments. Before that, though, I thought we should hear from one person who probably knows more about the Year of Water Action than anybody else. She lives it on a daily basis, and this is Anna Henderson, who is the advisor to the Governor, Mark Dayton, and the Lieutenant Governor, Tina Smith, on water issues. Actually, Anna was a graduate from here. She was a PhD in geology. She went out into the world and did a little bit of geology before being lured into the policy world by a fellowship in Washington, D.C., where she was advising Senator Franken, I think, on environment, energy, and agricultural issues. After that, she came back here and worked in the state system for a time before taking over this important job in the governor's office. So first of all, let me ask Anna to come on stage and give a brief presentation on the governor's thinking. Anna.
Hi, thanks so much for having me here tonight, and the Student Association for working on this. So I actually moved to Minnesota to begin with because of the lakes. I wanted to study sediment records in lakes for my graduate work. And then when I moved away, I moved back again because of the lakes and the river for non-study purposes, just quality of life. I really appreciated those aspects of the state. When I was a student here, I spent a lot of time in the Wilson Library next door. I don't know if any of you have been there, but in the basement, there's a map library, and I was comparing topographic maps and geologic maps, finding the perfect spots out west for doing field work. So it's nice to be back on the West Bank. And I wanted to get a sense of who's here, and I was just curious if who in the room is either majoring in or has a degree in a science or math field. So a lot of folks, yeah. And for those of you who don't have a degree in the sciences, do you feel science literate? Got a couple hands raised. And it's really important that we have a science literate society. And I think partly I'm just been thinking about this because right now, as we're all here, there are hearings raging at the Capitol. And a lot of what's happening there are discussions that have a basis in science and the natural world. And it's really important that we have a citizenry that is able to understand the impacts or understand the rationale behind why things are done. And the state agencies really strive, and it's been a big thing under Governor Dayton, but I know they were doing it before, to put their work into plain language to make sure that the general public are able to understand and have that be accessible to them and that knowledge so that they can understand why things are happening or why rules are changing, and they're able to follow what's happening there. So on behalf of Governor Dayton and Lieutenant Governor Tina Smith, I want to thank all of you for your science literacy and your interest in work in environmental and water-related issues. To the students in the room, I want to make really clear that your role it's not in the future. It's not about what are you going to do once you get out of here. It's about now. There's really no time to spare because what's happening at the federal and state level, for good or bad, are your future and what's going to happen for you. So I just really want to encourage you that your voice matters and you should make it heard now. So the legislative session's going on, and how many people here, has anyone here, well, I won't ask it. I was going to say, who's never been to the Capitol? Because when I was a student here, I never went to the Capitol for anything. But the building is open. There are even rooms on the third floor that anyone can reserve. So if you want to go to the Capitol and have a meeting with the other water resource students, you can reserve a room and you can go there and have a meeting. And people are coming to the rotunda. My office is pretty close to the rotunda, so I can tell you that every day there's a really large group there having some kind of either celebratory or more protest showing, and it's a really important part of our democracy that they do that. I was talking to a legislator recently who's putting out some bills that some folks have a concern with for their impact on the water and environmental issues. And she told me that they had this hearing and they were running out of time and there were all these people who wanted to testify, and she kind of had to choose who was going to go. And so the legislator chose the young person who was there. And I said, well, what did you think they were going to say? And the legislator was like, well, I knew they were going to get up and say my bill was terrible. And I was like, well, why'd you let them go? And she's like, because they were the youngest person there. So I want to really encourage all the students here you have a really powerful voice as youth. So as Peter was saying, Minnesotans really value our clean water, our clean air, all of our natural resources that we have, and we take a lot of pride in them. And we want to be able to swim in the lakes and rivers in our communities and go on picnics with our families on their shores. And we can do that in 60% of the waters in the state. But in the other 40%, they're not necessarily fishable and swimmable. And that's really at the heart of this year of water action. And what this is about is Minnesotans knowing why it matters, that there is a concern, and that we all want to work together to do something about it. So thank you so much for taking the time to think about water here tonight.
Well, thank you, Anna. It's a shared resource and a shared responsibility, and that's the theme of our event this evening. Let me come now to the panel who've been sitting patiently. Actually, they've been working very hard for most of the afternoon because they actually came into my class on water policy and gave presentations there as a kind of dry run, I suspect, to this evening. But I'm very grateful to them for spending all this time with us on these important matters. They've decided their own order of appearance, and so I'll introduce each one of them in this order of that they've elected to speak before we actually bring them on to kind of give a little presentation. And so sitting over here, who's going to be speaking first, is Rebecca Flood. She, as many of you will know, is Assistant Commissioner at Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, as well as overseeing agency's water resources. She's also very much importantly involved in interagency activities, and in particular chairs the interagency coordination team concerned with the Clean Water Fund. She wasn't a graduate of UMN, unfortunately, but she. This is the one black mark. She University of Michigan.
Michigan State.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Sitting on her right and your left is Doug Thomas, who replaces John Jaski, who's Executive Director of Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources. At short notice, he was called away to a legislative hearing. Doug is Assistant Director. He's been involved in local and state government for a substantial period, and now, amongst other things, is involved in the One Watershed, One Plan program, and he was a graduate of UMN. Whitney Place, to his right, is Director of Governor Affairs at Minnesota Department of Agriculture. Prior to that, she served as Outreach Coordinator of the Minnesota Agricultural Water Quality Certification Program. And Whitney did receive her master's from the Humphrey School, so we welcome her back. Paul Alwood, to her right, Assistant Commissioner at Minnesota Department of Health. He's very much involved in public health. He oversees the Health Protection Bureau. He was here at the university as Occupational Health and Safety Officer, and he's received all his degrees from the University of Minnesota. And then sitting at the end is Luke Skinner. Director, Division of Ecological and Water Resources, Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And within the division, Luke oversees a wide variety of programs, including regulation and oversight of water appropriations, water in public waters, work in public waters, and invasive species. So we've got a really wide array of interests and expertise. What we've asked each of them to do is to start off with a short presentation, 5 to 7 minutes, which gives their perspective on where they see the priorities in terms of water issues in Minnesota from the perspective of their agencies. So it is a kind of a short perspective. We have a very important lady sitting on the front row who will signal when you've had 5 minutes, signal when you've had 7 minutes, and if you go over 7, I shall start jumping up and down at the podium. So Rebecca, would you like to start? I think all you need to do is kind of talk into the microphones.
Thank you, Peter, very much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Michigan State University is a Big Ten school, so, you know, just I'm still a part of kind of some sort of club there. Better basketball team, well, for a while. Well, okay, never mind. I don't want to waste all my time on sports. But my role that we had a chance to chat before this convening, and I would like to explain a little bit about kind of how, as a state, we got to where we are, and then talk about a framework that the state agencies have developed for water resource protection and restoration. So what the legislative auditor did an audit of our agency in the early 2000s and recognized there, as a part of that, that the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency did not have enough funding to carry out its responsibilities under the Clean Water Act. And that led to a variety of conversations and a convening of a large stakeholder group to try to figure out how do we make that happen. What are we going to do and make recommendations to the legislature on how to adequately fund the agency to carry out its responsibilities of monitoring and assessing all the waters of the state, identifying where waters were impaired, and then developing plans for their restoration. And that led to a large discussion among stakeholders, and then the development in 2006 of the Clean Water Legacy Act. So a state statute that also provided one-time funding to kind of kickstart an effort to help primarily the Pollution Control Agency meet its responsibilities. But what it did do in setting up responsibilities in statute was to lay out a requirement that the Pollution Control Agency, in cooperation with other state agencies, develop a framework for how are we going to monitor and assess all these waters that we have in our states and figure out what's going on with them, and then figure out the plans that we're going to have to do to protect and restore these waters. And so what we did then, that kick-started the broader conversation within the community and the state about how do we fund this on an ongoing basis, and that led to 2008 and the constitutional amendment that provides, which passed in November of 2008, which provides 3/8 of 1% an additional sales tax. So voters voted to increase their taxes in order to help fund activities for, so 3/8 of 1%. So 1/8 of that went to clean water, 1/8 went to outdoor heritage, and then the other was split between arts and cultural heritage and parks and trails. So a very comprehensive package, a wide variety of interests that came together and said, these things are important to Minnesota. And what that has resulted in on the clean water side is about $100 million a year of additional funding from citizens of the state of Minnesota saying, water is important to our state. Let's get on with figuring out how to make things better. And so what we then did as agencies is developed what we've called the Minnesota Water Management Framework. So it looks at all of the 80 8-digit hydrologic unit codes, so sorry to get too techie in there, but those are the major watersheds within the state of Minnesota, and that's the framework by which we will go around the state and look at each one of these watersheds on a 10-year rotating cycle. So we do monitoring every year in each one of those 80 watersheds for some primary parameters as well as flow. And then every 10 years, we go into those watersheds as the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, working with local partners. We do some very intensive biological monitoring. We look at what is in those watersheds, what should be in those watersheds, and if the things that should be there aren't, what is causing them not to be there, or what is stressing the aquatic biology that's actually there. That gives us a very strong foundation then for figuring out a baseline of where we are with all of our water resources around the state. From there then, we have worked on other aspects of kind of it's almost a continuous improvement cycle where we do monitoring and assessment in those two steps. Then we develop plans for restoration or protection of those water resources, and those things meet our primary responsibilities under the Clean Water Act. Then what we do once we have all that data and information is we're able to prepare plans, watershed restoration and protection strategies. It's an acronym called RAPS, and it wouldn't be a government program if it didn't have an acronym. So with these RAPS, with these plans at a very high level, we can provide that information to our local partners. They can then figure out what they want to prioritize and do within their own local watersheds. So they develop, as Doug will talk about, what we're calling either local comprehensive plans, and now we're moving specifically to watershed plans called One Watershed, One Plan. And then they get to figure out what they're going to do and focus on and develop those plans, and then actually carry out local implementation in not just for water resource protection, but for groundwater, for drinking water, and those types of things. So we have this 25 years worth of funding within our state to carry out our major responsibilities. And when I travel around the country and talk to my counterparts, they are envious of us that we have, we still have clean water in our state, and we want to keep it that way. We want to improve the water that it does have problems, and that we have the resources and the commitments of the state of Minnesota and the citizens of Minnesota to do it. So then what I would identify from my perspective as an agency about what are some of the major issues that I see is when the Clean Water Act was passed in 1972, there came grant program with that, 75% funding for wastewater treatment plant, either improvements or upgrades or building new plants. 75% of that was federally funded. It was grants. 15% of that came from state grant funding. So the locals only had to pay 10%. That grant program phased out, and then, thank you, I'm getting the hook. Yeah. Okay, he's going to jump up and down too. That's really serious. So with that, I would identify those grant programs are gone for the most part now. So aging infrastructure, those went away in the early to mid 90s. Local units of government are paying those costs all themselves, and it's really, really stressful for them. The other thing I would identify, and that folks will talk more about later, is because we've done such a good job of controlling sources of pollution from wastewater treatment plants, it makes the contributions from our agricultural sector that much more pronounced, and that, I think, is the other major issue that we have to address as a part of our work going forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Now over to Doug.
I guess I'm not very prepared. Rebecca, all I can say is go Gophers. Picking up where Rebecca left off on, again, as she mentioned, the state really set a policy, or at least within the agencies, about how we look to coordinate our efforts really to support this 10-year watershed framework. Where we come into it through the Board of Water and Soil Resources is really with the recognition that the state, for many, many years, has placed the primary responsibility for our land use planning and management in the hands of local government. That has led to the state vesting numerous water management authorities with our various local governments. And so we work with cities, counties, watershed districts, and soil and water conservation districts, really then with the primary responsibility of how we begin, or how we continue to address non-point source pollution across those areas. That framework is built off of a very successful watershed structure in the metropolitan area, and we now are transitioning the plans that are largely based on political boundaries outside of the metro area to this, what was referred to by Peter as one watershed, one plan. Again, moving away from largely political boundary plans and implementation strategies to those based on watersheds. And that's just a logical transition when you think about the approach of routinely 10-year cycle of looking at the major watersheds, doing the monitoring, the assessment, and then building that information into structured implementation plans at that watershed level. So it's really through that lens that I'm going to touch on just a couple of really main challenges that we see, in implementing that. The first one is, I'd like to characterize as really the intensification of land use that we have seen across the state, whether it's in our agricultural areas, our forested areas, or our urban areas. And that's led to some challenges. One of the bigger ones that we're going to be looking at is how do we address the impacts of altered hydrology? We've now have the studies and the science that show that that's a significant cause of accelerated stream bank and stream erosion, and in order to address the non-point and the impairments that we have from sediment and phosphorus in a lot of our waterways and lakes, are going to have to look at that issue. We also are going to be challenged with looking at source water protection for the cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and St. Cloud. Most of that comes from the upper Mississippi River, and again, with the impacts of intensification of shoreline development, some of the fragmentation of our forests, and some of the activities up there, it's putting greater pressure, and we really need to think about that in terms of how do we address those protection strategies in the context of our local governments and their authorities that they have to help us make sure that those waters are staying protected. And then on maybe kind of a little bit of a broader scale, looking at how we address one of the challenges of climate change for us. The two things that come to mind for us is that in our urban areas, we have planned flood control around historically picking certain types of storm events. Many municipalities say, we're going to design our systems to handle a 25-year storm event, and if we do that, we will prevent flooding of homes adjacent to those streets and to those sewers. We now have new documents that we use for looking at rainfall events, and we're seeing more rain, and we're seeing much more intense rainfall events occurring during times of the year that historically we haven't seen some of those. Basically, a lot of those happening in the fall of the year. Communities are faced with some very difficult policy decisions about now all of a sudden that design standard that they're using is no longer adequate to protect those homes in higher intensity rainfalls. So how do we then think about our policies as it relates to in our plans to say, are we going to accept more occasional flooding of properties, minor flooding, or do we look at what the expenditures and the investments are going to be to basically rebuild and modify that infrastructure to deal with that? In our agricultural areas, we're seeing that some of the management practices that typically we've looked to address wind erosion and water erosion in these much higher intensity storm events is shifting maybe some of our discussion to how we have to think about structural practices in some of those agricultural landscapes. So that's another area. And then federal policies. In the work that we do, we're greatly affected, our local governments, our soil and water districts, and the work that they do along with our federal partners, the U.S. Department of Ag, Natural Resources Conservation Service, on the Farm Bill. What happens with, commodity title, the insurance programs, the conservation title, our energy programs, all have very direct impacts on what we do here and what we see the impacts of those in Minnesota. And then the last one I want to just mention is that, and you can probably tell by the color of my beard, is that we really have a challenge with the workforce in much of rural Minnesota. When we look at those people that work in those soil and water districts office, those county offices, they're working with those producers and those landowners to help them with technical assistance and the financial assistance to implement good land management practices that will get at helping us address soil erosion, wind erosion, and water quality degradation. We're going to see 20 to 25% change in the workforce, and we see a less connected group of individuals coming out of our academic programs that are not connected to agriculture much anymore, and that's going to be a big challenge. And our institutional systems, I think right now, aren't really well designed to address that issue. As we look at that, training and credentialing and getting that workforce out there capable to be credible resource managers and to work with those, our agricultural producers, our forest owners, and people on lakes, rivers, and streams, and in urban areas. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Whitney.
Thank you, Doug. Over to Whitney now, who will give us a perspective from the agricultural sector, no doubt. Whitney.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you so much for everyone who was involved in organizing this event. Maybe now more than ever, we need to keep having these environmental policy conversations. So I'm really excited that there's an event about water here at the Humphrey. And, I'm very happy to be here, not only because this got me out of a legislative hearing, but because I'm really interested in this topic and this conversation. So as Rebecca mentioned, agriculture is kind of the last frontier in terms of what we need to address in with our water quality resources. And it's not an easy answer. I think across agencies, we're kind of deciding from a public policy perspective, what approach should we take? Should it be voluntary? Should it be regulatory? Should it be a mix of the two? Should it be somewhere in the middle? Working with our agricultural stakeholders in Minnesota, agriculture is a huge part of our economy. Right now, farmers are really struggling. The commodity prices of the crops that we grow in Minnesota are low. Some are not even, making any money this year. So asking them to, install new practices or do things that cost them money to protect water quality, which is a public good, is kind of a hard ask this year. And then there's some of these outside factors, like what they're paying in healthcare. And it's not just an easy, answer, like you need to do this and our water quality will improve, or you need to spend this much and our water quality will improve. And so at the Department of Agriculture, we've been trying to address these things, and one of the programs I was fortunate enough to work on was our new Minnesota Ag Water Quality Certification Program. And that is a voluntary program that farmers can sign up for, and then we certify that their farm is addressing any risks to water quality. And we just went statewide last year, and I'm very, very proud of our stats that we've developed so far. We have 356 farms certified in the state, and so, that's an achievement. This is a pretty rigorous process that these farms have to go through. And what we're excited about is kind of the economic component of this. We do have a lot of agribusiness and food businesses in Minnesota, and how can we value these benefits that these certified farms are providing in terms of water quality and turn that into an economic advantage for a food product? Another thing that the department would like to invest more in is research for continuous cover crops. We have the Forever Green program over on the St. Paul campus, and they're developing some exciting new crops that can be grown in Minnesota, specifically in areas that have sensitivity to groundwater contamination. And so, not just asking the farmers to reduce their nitrogen application or to do things in this certain way, but actually give them an economic alternative where there's a market and there's, demand for the product that they can grow. I kind of transitioned from working on a water quality program to now I manage our government affairs at the agency. And I think one challenge now, and I think we all know what the political realities are at this moment in time, is, kind of the political will to address issues like this. And not only the political will in terms of, regulations or policies or, how we address these things, but also funding. And so I think that's something that also needs to be a part of the conversation, is not just like, what's the best public policy option, but like also like in this political context, how can we best address these issues? So I think with that, I'll end my comments.
Well, thank you, Whitney. And now I guess we move to a little bit of a different perspective, and that is a drinking water perspective from Paul.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Allwood. I'm Assistant Commissioner with Minnesota Department of Health, and it's a real pleasure to be with all of you tonight. And thanks to Peter and the student group for organizing this really important opportunity to have a conversation about water. So at the Minnesota Department of Health, our mission is to protect, maintain, and improve the health of all Minnesotans. And we pursue our mission with a vision for a state where there is a health equity, where communities are thriving, and where everyone has what they need to be healthy. And as I talk a little bit more about what we're doing in water, you'll see why it's important to keep that mission and our vision in focus. So at the Department of Health, we are the EPA's delegate for enforcing or ensuring that there's compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. We have a very large program at the Department of Health that's responsible for ensuring that when you go to a tap to get a glass of water, you can be assured that it's safe. And we take that responsibility very seriously. We do a really good job of it. We are some 99.9% compliant with the Safe Drinking Water Standard. Yet, in spite of that, there are some challenges that we face as a state drinking water program, and I'll just highlight a few of them for you, and I'm hoping that as we get into more general discussion, we'll be able to kind of flesh out some of these a little bit more. So the first is that, drinking water infrastructure is aging. There are problems with infrastructure. Some of it is because it's really old, and in many cases, the huge cost of keeping up with infrastructure upgrade can't be borne by every community. So there is disparity as you go from communities that have large income base and to rural communities where there isn't the resources to make infrastructure upgrades. There's also lead in our drinking water systems, in our drinking water distribution system. Everyone knows that lead is a health hazard, and trying to figure out what to do about this problem is one of the things that concern us. And we've had internal conversations. We're working with our stakeholders in the federal government and also with local communities and drinking water authorities to try to come up with ways to deal with that problem. There was a survey done by the EPA that indicates that Minnesota will need something like $7.4 billion in the next 20 years to just maintain our current drinking water infrastructure. So you can see that this is a huge challenge that obviously we're going to have to be very clever about how we address it. There's also a problem of contamination of drinking water by various chemicals. You've heard about the issues with agricultural production as it currently happens in Minnesota. Agriculture is a very important aspect of our economy, and we need very vibrant and successful agricultural production, but we also need drinking water, and so trying to ensure that we achieve both of those is something of a challenge, and something that we're continuing to look for more innovative and clever ways to address. So the program that Whitney spoke about is the Ag Water Quality Certification Program. That's a good example of an innovation that I think will will help to alleviate some of the problems. I wanted to just talk quickly about one case study that I think highlights the importance of, what's happening on the land and how that could have, serious consequences for our drinking water. Toledo, Ohio, recently had to issue a do not drink order for all of their customers, about 500,000 people in that city for 5 days, so you can just imagine not being able to drink water or use water for cooking for that amount of time for so many people. Obviously, that's a catastrophe that we want to avoid, and so far we've not seen anything like that in Minnesota, but if we continue on our current course, our concern at the Department of Health is that we could see that, and so we're trying to be proactive to head off that kind of scenario. And then I mentioned that our vision is for a state where there is health equity, and as it turns out, in drinking water, there are lots of equity challenges as well. As I mentioned, in smaller communities, more rural communities that are traditionally underserved, there's a constellation of factors that limit their ability to ensure that everyone has access to safe drinking water. In Minnesota, that's also true for people who drink from private wells. Currently, private wells have not been provided the same level of oversight that people who drink from public wells have, that ensures that they can have confidence that their drinking water is safe. So, those are some of the things that we consider to be important, pressing challenges, and I'll stop there, and hopefully we'll get into some of these a little bit more during the discussion.
And finally, over to Luke, who gives us a more general perspective in terms of quantity of supply as well as quality. So,
great, thank you, Peter. And it is nice to be here over at the Humphrey Institute. I spent most of my time over on the St. Paul campus, so this is kind of like foreign territory. I'm used to the ag fields in Hodson Hall, where I did a lot of entomology work in the past. But so I wanted, from the Department of Natural Resources perspective, I'm just going to talk more about water quantity and the challenges that we have here in the state regarding that, at probably kind of a broad level. And we think of Minnesota as a very water-rich state, especially the upper Midwest, including Michigan, Wisconsin, those states with the Great Lakes and all. It's a water-rich state, and we don't have water problems, right? So we can just use all the quantity of waters that we need, and that's just not the case. It's not unlimited. And there's two things to think about. One, abundance of water is not uniformly distributed across the state of Minnesota. It's in pockets, right? There's areas of the state where we are not water-rich, and we have challenges that way. And also, water use is also not evenly distributed across the state. So in areas of high use, we might have low abundance of water, which leads to water conflict and other challenges that we have in those areas. So these are some of the kind of the core functions that we work at. And the one stat I just wanted to mention is that in Minnesota's use of groundwater has increased 35% over the last 25 years. And that's from increasing our urban areas with growth in some certain suburbs to some of the outlying communities as well. Also, we have a real growth in irrigated agriculture in parts of the state. So with all that, it's just a real increase of pressures in specific areas, especially at aquifers that might not have that abundance of water to deal with all the increased use. So in Minnesota, we are a riparian water state, if everyone understands. The water is owned and managed by the state of Minnesota for the citizens of Minnesota. If you look to the west, into the Western water law, that's all property rights. So you have a property right. If you have water rights for that water that's underneath your property, and that's really been longstanding in the West. We don't have that here. We have what we call Eastern water law, which follows that. But it really provides that structure for us as a state to think long-term and strategically about how we use our water and how we sustainably use it across the state long-term. And that is what our charge is. The Department of Natural Resources charge by statute is to ensure we have sustainable water. One of the things I also want to mention is that what people don't think about a lot of times is that our groundwater is connected to our surface waters. And so even if we're using our groundwater for many purposes, many times we have impacts to our surface waters. And when you do that, we have impacts, especially to our natural resources, whether it's cold water trout streams, to calcareous fens, to other wetlands. There's just a variety of different water, water features on the surface that really rely on groundwater in many ways to help support that. And we run into conflict many times as we start to increase our water use, whether it's a local unit of government, or it's a suburb, or if it's some irrigation that's increasing in a certain part of the state, where we have impacts to our surface waters, and then conflict occurs, where we have conflict between natural resource benefits or values and economic values. And when this happens, it's very challenging. We see that at the legislature right now, where you see bills coming out trying to say, well, we value the work that's in economics on the economic side, and we're not going to value the resource side. And we have that constant tension. Our mission at the Department of Natural Resources is threefold. One is to protect the natural resources of the state for long-term sustainability. That includes the water. Second is to provide sustainable long-term use of our natural resources for economic benefit, which includes water and other things, forest, timber industry, et cetera. And third is for that sustainable use for recreation. And sometimes those come into conflict, and we try to manage those. And right now, the way we manage water, in many cases, is on a permit-by-permit, city-by-city, or individual basis. And it makes it very challenging to think, how are you going to do this collectively in a long-term fashion, strategically? So recently, we're approaching some ideas about how we do this. You heard about the Watershed One Plan initiative, and we're using what we call groundwater management areas. And it's a new pilot effort to look at how can we collectively look at what the need of the water is within that groundwater management area. What are the impacts, and how would we think we would distribute that water long term so everyone has the benefit from it, but we also can make it sustainable long term? The three areas are, we have one in the north and east metro, up around White Bear Lake, and a much broader area there. One is what we call the Bonanza Valley, which is straight west of kind of Wilmer area. And the third is the Straight River, which is up near Park Rapids. And these were all chosen because of the increased high use and the concerns that we had for the impacts to those aquifers in those areas from the continued use. And not just the quantity, but the quality as well. Nitrate issues, as we heard, and others, as you pump more water, you might get more drawdown of nitrates into the groundwater, et cetera. Not just nitrates, but other things. So we have some of those issues as well. So what I want to do is just put out this idea that we need to think collectively and long term about how we manage these resources collectively in a much broader way than we do at an individual by individual basis. But when we start to do that, it really does cause concern for folks, because now you say, well, I've had this water for 40 years. I've been getting water from my well for 40 years, and now you're telling me I can't use as much because we have other people coming in and wanting to use it. In Minnesota, if you have a well and you've been pulling water for irrigation, for example, for 40 years, a new farmer can come in and ask for water, and they have the same exact right as that person who's had water for 40 years. And that's what causes some of those challenges as well. So how do we do this equitably long term? So, thank you.
Well, thanks to them all for giving us some food for thought and for more or less keeping to time. Congratulations on that. Let me now invite Jeff Peterson to come forward and moderate the Q's and A's. Jeff, as you know, is Director of Water Resources here. He is an economist, which I guess we won't hold too much against him, but PhD from Cornell. Prior to coming to UMN, he was he was faculty at Kansas State University. So over to you, Jeff.
Well, thank you, Peter. And let me add my thanks to the panelists for them all being here, and to Anna Henderson too, of course. You all represent, for those of us who work in water circles, you represent the group of agencies we call the Big Five. And it's really not very often that we have an opportunity to have a conversation in a forum like this with senior leaders from the Big Five. So we really appreciate you being here. And I know it's a particularly busy time of year with the legislative session. So as everybody here knows, we've been taking questions electronically for a few weeks now as people registered, and even after you registered, you could submit that questions that way on the website. No doubt that this is a topic of interest to a lot of people, and that process has generated many questions that go in many different directions. We're not going to have time, I don't think, for me to ask all of the questions individually, but Peter Kalo and I have gone through them, sifted them somewhat, and identified some common themes. So I'm going to start with some what you might think of as composite questions that are based on issues that a number of you touched on. And then I'll remind everybody again that if there's additional questions that have come to your mind while people were speaking here or while we're starting our questions, you could submit them as a tweet using the hashtag MNWater. It's probably ironic that I was called the tweet master because, truth be known, I don't even have a Twitter account. But the real tweet master is Bree, who's one of the students in the back there, and she's been monitoring the flow of questions. So she's the real tweet master. When we get to that point in the program, I'll turn it over to her and she'll ask your questions. Okay, so the first composite question, one of the things that came up a number of times from our audience and is a topic that I've been hearing a lot about in recent discussions too, is there's a number of changes taking place at the federal level, both on the regulatory side and the budget side. Some proposed, some have started to be enacted already. How might these changes impact what we're doing here in Minnesota in terms of our state water policy? Doug, you actually mentioned federal policies and the way it interfaces in a lot of ways with Bowser's work. Would you like to take a first stab at that?
Sure, thank you, Jeff. So from our work and the work of our local governments, we certainly think about the Farm Bill. Congress is going to be taking that up again in 2018. I won't speculate on the current federal budget process, but it certainly has implications. If the U.S. Department of Agriculture does in fact have to take a 21% budget reduction, it comes out of discretionary programs, and for us those discretionary programs are those very conservation programs that our landowners look to help them address their resource concerns on their property. For example, in Minnesota, we have a federal workforce through our U.S. Department of Ag Natural Resources Conservation of about 425 people. I'm just going to use some rough numbers. One of the federal cost share incentive programs, it's about $30 million a year. The Federal Conservation Reserve, the CRP program, is another program that is widely used in Minnesota to help manage some of those more highly sensitive areas on certain farms and certain properties. All of those things are influenced directly by the Farm Bill. Any reductions there result in reductions here that ultimately leads to either those needs are unmet or it shifts the burden to state and local government. And then there's, simply some of these things that are what I would call unintended consequences. For example, crop insurance, there's a federal agency called the Risk Management Agency. It currently has provisions in it which are actually a detriment to farmers using cover crops or seeding cover crops earlier in the season than they're allowed to do. That's getting worked out, but those are the kind of things that, at a federal level can have a huge impact. And I'll quickly wrap this up, get to the next question. But for example, we've got about 500,000 acres of Conservation Reserve Program lands that are going to be expiring in Minnesota, and yet we have a federal acreage cap that if it stays the same or goes down, those acres won't have a chance to be re-enrolled in that particular program or new acres. And so again, major impacts on those programs and those activities that can really be used to help support work on the part of our agricultural producers in the state.
I'll take a jump in too where, the Pollution Control Agency gets about $20 million from the federal government, and we would just have to do less. We'd have to, be cutting various programs. In addition, we also are at this really critical point now on Lake Superior in the Duluth Superior Harbor, where we're doing a large restoration project. We can leverage, I believe it's $90 million of federal funds. That is just centuries-long legacy pollution in that estuary, and we have all the plans developed. We're ready to go. We're waiting for the federal dollars to come in. We've tried to line up state dollars to match those federal funds if the federal funds don't come in. We're on a schedule right now to complete the remediation activities by 2020, if we can get that money. If we don't get that money, that legacy, that long-lasting pollution is going to still be there, impacting those resources. So we could get it done, but we may not if we don't get that federal funding.
Great. Thank you. So another set of questions we got relates to another set of coordination issues at the government level, but this one is coordination within the state, so across like the agencies you all represent. And specifically the question is, can you describe the ways that there's cooperation or possible conflicts or differences across the agencies that implement water policy in Minnesota? And Rebecca, I know you chair a committee, that task force that's specifically charged with interagency coordination, so I'll let you take a stab at that.
Yeah, thanks for the question, because I think it's a really good one. And the agencies have always cooperated on our water work. But I think with the passage of the constitutional amendment, and this influx of so many more dollars into our work, it really forced us to get together and make sure that we were, because those dollars that come for Clean Water Fund are really funneled through agency programs for on-the-ground implementation, either going out from Bowser or PCA as grants, or the other two agencies that are a part of our interagency team that aren't here tonight are the Public Facilities Authority that funds drinking water and wastewater improvements, and then the Metropolitan Council, which is a regional government in the Twin Cities here. And they have a lot of water resource responsibilities in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. So we get together regularly, twice a month, to really go through either developing budget proposals for the biennial budget for the governor's consideration. That becomes then, he makes decisions that are included in his biennial budget package. We discuss and make those recommendations and prioritize our different projects and efforts and make sure that they're coordinated. And then when the legislature follows through with an appropriation to our agencies, then we meet to make sure that we're delivering those programs in an efficient and effective manner, that we aren't duplicating our efforts, and that we're making sure that we're working together. So it's really worked phenomenally well, and we have a lot of really good cooperation between the agencies as we develop and deliver programs for clean water in Minnesota. So I don't know if others want to add to that.
So, yeah, I'd like to just build on what Rebecca said. We are, in many ways, codependent on each other. We cannot function without working with the other agencies. And so they're almost like siblings, right? So we all have our different issues, and we don't always agree on everything all the time, and we get there. But in the end, we all have the same mission at heart, and we have to work through those issues. And we do function at a pretty high level between the agencies. And there is more coordination than most people would actually think that goes on, even down to the staff level. Well, you might see at the managing level, there's these high-level conversations, but our staff are working day to day, whether it's on specific issues or in the field on a variety of things, to make sure we can push the missions of clean water and water management, or a variety of other natural resource management as well. So it's just critical that this work continues, and we couldn't do our work without working with the other agencies.
And it really focuses down too on working with our local partners, as Doug was referencing earlier. They're the ones who help deliver the programs on the ground, on the local level, and we need a really high level of interaction with them, or PCA's water monitoring programs, or Department of Ag and their Ag Water Quality Certification programs. So it's really a lot of work with local soil and water conservation districts, cities, other governments. So it really is much more integrated. And we, as Luke said, we may not always agree, but we have to work it out. And that's true across the agencies as well as with our local partners too. They raise issues and concerns, and we have to figure out how to work it out together so that we can make sure we deliver the resource protections that we need to.
Good. Okay, so thank you. Now I'm going to turn to the million-dollar question, or maybe according to some estimates, I've seen what's maybe more properly called the billion-dollar question. So as my fellow economists, but others too, have pointed out, one of the core issues here is that if we're going to improve and restore our water resources in the state, it's going to cost something. It's going to result in changes that are going to have to be paid for by somebody. So the question is, who should pay those costs of changes that are needed? And Whitney, I know this is a question, I work in agriculture too, and agriculture water intersections. I know this is a question that never comes up in those conversations, so I'm handing you a novel question here.
Well, it might be a novel question, not be a novel question, but I don't know if I have the answer. Rebecca kind of gave me a tip earlier. I think we've kind of decided as a society that the public is going to pay for these things. We passed the Clean Water Fund Amendment to do some of this stuff. We have the conservation title in the Farm Bill. Up to now, that's been our policy choices. In terms of the future, I don't know how sustainable that is, especially in this political climate. How can we generate enough funds to pay for those ecosystem services? I think we do need to start getting a little bit more creative, and in terms of trying to use market tools or trading tools to be able to kind of compensate, for some of these services that we're asking private landowners to provide to us, the public.
Anybody else want to?
Jeff, one thing to maybe is worth noting is that we have many parts of the state where we have watershed districts that have been established. They're created by petition, so they're there to address issues that citizens have brought forward that said these are things that our current political boundaries and our political entities aren't capable of addressing on their own, and they needed a different structure in which to do that. There are many places in the state where landowners are paying money into that watershed district to support the implementation of flood control. In some cases, some of their purposes are still drainage, but many of them are now shifting into looking at water quality. That's not equal across the state, and so I think there are places where the share of the cost is being borne differently, and it's an area that I think people are beginning to look at and try to think about how do we all particularly share differently in the costs that are going to need to be spent to address whether it's our infrastructure, whether it's nutrient reductions, soil erosion reductions, or whatever those things might be.
I think part of the challenge, though, with all this is who pays the cost. As part of is it valued? Is natural resources, the clean water, the water resources, are they valued enough that people want to invest? And when it's put up against other things such as economy and challenges there, it's a challenge. I mean, so we even within our agencies, as we look and we see current budgets coming down through proposals through the legislature, are they supporting? And we know if we get the dollars through the legislature, as Whitney said, that's your dollars, right? That's coming from the citizens of Minnesota, and does industry pay their fair share as well? But that's part of our challenge is it valued enough, and people valued enough that they're willing to put the dollars towards it, as much as not just who pays, but how are we going to get those dollars? So it's a value, part of it's in a value statement in that.
I think I'd add too that, in part of the governor's discussion of developing a water ethic in the state is everybody has responsibility for how they impact water resources. And so, farmers are putting in money in terms of sales tax receipts. On the other hand, too, I pay not just sales tax, but I pay my watershed district fee, my stormwater utility fee, those types of things. So it is borne differently across the state. So I think that's another place where we, as Doug was saying, we really should have another conversation, I think, or continue that conversation about how do we have market-driven solutions and have more equitable distribution of those costs.
Great, lots of perspectives to think about there and dimensions. So as one follow-up to that is related to other questions we got. so we talked about the economics of this and the costs and the benefits and how the economic burden and gains are spread around. But we're talking about getting to water quality goals and improving water resources. What it comes down to is through behavioral change of some kind. And there are other ways, in addition to economic incentives, of course, of influencing behavior, education, collaboration with local communities, local units of governments. And these are the kinds of approaches, Paul, that come up a lot in the public health arena and have been used in that way. So the question is, what tools are available to state government in that domain, and how might they be applied to water resource issues?
Thanks for the question, Jeff. As I was thinking about what I might say that, because it's a vexing problem. It is a wicked problem. There is more and more understanding, particularly in today's age, that people don't always change their behavior based upon just, bold-faced facts. And by the way, there's, what's a fact now is, widely disputed, and it's less and less certain that, providing more evidence and more data and more statistics is actually correlated with meaningful behavior change. But there is hope, because there's also, emerging understanding that what we need is to get people to start feeling, more so than knowing. And so, I think part of our strategy here, and it's something that we're pretty good at in public health, is we can make people feel, about problems that are important. And one way of describing that is that we've used a paradigm that was made famous by a man called Peter Sandman, which is that risk is equal to hazard plus outrage. So, people perceive risk when they understand something to be hazardous, but they need something else in order to get them to act. They need outrage. We have to somehow make them feel, that this is important. There's an emotional component to what is that's needed in order to kind of lead to important actions. So I think for water, we need to make people feel differently about water. It's part of the water ethic. And we don't necessarily have all of the methodologies worked out yet, but I think that's where we're going to have to get in order for us to see people really wanting to take it on and ensure that there is improvement.
If I could jump in also, something comes to mind in the agriculture sector that we've been working on for the past couple of months, and I saw someone from Hi Erin, from Environmental Initiative here earlier. We've been working with them to have a dialogue with some agricultural stakeholders over the past couple of months to develop a proposal that would establish farmer-led councils in some watersheds across Minnesota. And this would kind of give these councils an opportunity to really look at a local level at what their issues are and develop some solutions, and potentially bring up proposals for us to fund in those areas. And I think that's an aspect of the behavioral thing that we strive to achieve in terms of installing water quality practices in the state. Sometimes maybe the top-down, I don't even want to say this, but buffer strip approach turns some people off to some of these issues. But if you talk to them at the local level, this is what's happening in your community, they can really come together and develop a solution. And so that's something that we've proposed in the governor's supplemental budget, and we hope that can move forward.
Great, thank you. So I want to make sure we have some time to take live questions from Twitter. So I assume we've got some that have come in, and I will turn it over to Bree for our first question.
All right, first question is, what is the most important legislation we in the audience can focus on this session related to water?
Don't all jump in at once.
Yeah, I think it depends on which agency you ask. I think there's a variety of things out there right now. So from the Department of Natural Resources perspective, there's a little bit of an assault on deregulation of water. And so there's a lot of wanting to roll back the regulations and our ability to be able to manage it in a way where we where we're trying to protect the resources. So policy is probably as much challenge there. And there's also potential in like the Senate bill to roll back the dollars that we have to manage the water. So it's a combination. So it shows you where the values are in some places, and so that's what we're talking about. So for us, it's what we were talking about earlier. Are we going to get that ethic? Are we going to get that value back to where water is valued and they're willing to put money and resources to it so we can manage it sustainably? So that's just a small one. Do we think it's going to go there long term? Probably, we don't know, because lots can happen between now and the end of the session. We know things change dramatically, but those are some of the first things we're hearing as they come out, at least from a water quantity and natural resource protection standpoint.
I think I would echo that on a water quality perspective. There are some bills that are seeking to either remove our authority or to limit our authority in some ways for implementing water quality standards. So I think there's a variety of reasons for that, but as the delegated agency responsible for implementing the Clean Water Act in Minnesota, federally delegated responsibilities, that makes it really difficult to comply with the federal regulation, and then if we're being prohibited on the state level from doing what we're required to do under federal regulation. So it could lead to a lot of gridlock in terms of issuing permits for regulated activities, wastewater discharges, industrial development and improvement, new businesses, those types of things. So I'm not really sure. I think I understand some of the motivation, but the consequence could be pretty severe if those bills would pass. And then similarly on the funding side, some of the cuts, the expectations of running additional stakeholder involvement or peer review of science or those types of things at the same time as cutting our budgets really would make that extremely difficult to comply with some of the draft bills that are out there.
Right, and I don't know if this is the most important, but it is important. The governor's budget has a proposal for about $160 million for infrastructure improvement for drinking water and wastewater systems. And as I mentioned when I gave my opening remarks, we're facing something like a $7.4 billion infrastructure cost over 20 years. So anything we can do now to chip away at that problem, I think is going to be very, very important.
Okay, next Twitter question.
The second question is, the Year of Water Action is about creating and fostering a water ethic. What does that mean to you?
I'll take the first shot at that. I think, Whitney mentioned one thing that's happening, and with this idea of, creating the opportunity for within the state for farmer-led councils to be created, and not something that's going to be mandated, but an opportunity, and that will it align itself with our soil and water districts or one watershed, one plan? We don't know, but I think it's a way to bring people together to say, is there a common cause? Is there value in addressing, whether it's a trout stream or whether it's a lake or whether it's, some other resource, to say that we place enough value in it that it starts causing some of that change outside of the two traditional ways, which you compel people to do things by regulation, or you pay people to do things. And it's that third one, which is the tough one. Recycling might be the best example of where that works, where it just becomes something that people believe is the right thing to do, and they were very successful at it. I think the other thing with One Watershed, One Plan from Bowser's perspective is it's a framework by which we are bringing county commissioners, soil and water conservation districts, cities where, there are participants in it, bringing those elected officials together on a watershed basis rather than just thinking about, their own political boundaries, as well as providing an opportunity for other stakeholders to come to the table. And again, will that, help generate a little bit more momentum for implementation of those strategies that to address their highest priority resource concerns? We think it, has the ability to do that. The Root River is one of our pilots that has been completed and that plan has been approved. And they engage in a kind of a civic engagement process in that watershed, which has been very successful in bringing people together and reaching some agreements on how they're going to work together to collaborate and to move forward to address some of their priority resource concerns that they identified in that plan.
I think for me, what the Year of Clean Water Action means, and I think what the governor has intended with it is to have conversations about what does clean water mean to you as Minnesotans and to all of us. And I think kind of a couple things have happened with those conversations, and it's kind of continued to rattle around in the governor's brain about, we've had this Year of Water Action. What next? How do we keep building on the momentum and having conversations? Part of it is, what Whitney was talking about. But the other thing that the governor has just recently announced is what we've kind of short-termed 25 by 25. He wants to see a 25% improvement in water quality by 2025. And he wants us as state agencies to go out and have conversations and hold local town forums to try to talk to Minnesotans about how do we actually get that done. Kind of a step beyond, we're talking about water, now kind of what are the next steps to get more people engaged about doing things for water, both water quantity and water quality. So it's another way, I think, and there's bills that have been introduced kind of carrying that forward. It's another way to kind of keep momentum going. We as agencies prepared a couple years ago what we've called the Clean Water Roadmap. So over 25 years, we're going to have $2.5 billion that go to clean water. That's a lot of money. And we projected a couple years ago that was going to result in about a 6 to 7% improvement in our water resources. All of that money we're going to see, because it takes, but there's a lot of land in Minnesota, there's a lot of land use impacts. We're going to see a 6 to 7% improvement in our water resources. The governor didn't think that was enough. He didn't think that was fast enough. He wants us to do more and go faster, so we have to have conversations about how are we going to get there. Because there's not enough money, even in the Clean Water Fund, to pay for everything that we need to do. So we have to have local people, everyone, all citizens participating in making our water resources better.
So, I'll just quickly chime in on that. When I think about, water ethic, what comes to mind for me is a song that was inspired by the Standing Rock protests. The song's called Water's Life. And there's an alternative title in the Lakota language. And, I would encourage anyone who's not heard that song to kind of listen to it, because, water is valuable. Doug talks about values, and I think that's it, but valued in many different ways. There's economic value, obviously, there's public health values, but then there are also other values that sometimes aren't considered, in the way that they should. And I think it's only, as we manage to, embrace the full dimensions of, what water means to life, that we'll be able to say that we've achieved, a reasonable ethic around water.
And for me, I thought of it from a personal level. I have 3 children, right? They're young and they're coming up, and my goal for them is for them to care about it and do something about it where they can help protect the water, whether it's overuse, it's pollution, it's knowing that we're not washing things down the drain, but we're using, wise use of water, economic, all those things. That's the water ethic. We're not just taking water for granted. And I think for us, you sitting in the room, I likely don't, right? We're here because we have that concern. But the general public is getting that kind of across, that it's a culture change and about the way we do things, whether it was, we brought that up, whether it was the littering campaigns in the past or any of these other things. For me, it's a culture shift. And as I try to instill in my kids, what does it mean to really value water? And what can you do on a personal level to help protect and conserve water long term?
Well, maybe hard to believe, but we're already running low on time. We have, I think, many more questions that I didn't get to, and I think many more on Twitter too. one of the reasons that we picked Twitter is that those questions will be there and be visible, and there are things that I think that all of us could think about and perhaps think about how to respond to. Let me, if I may, take the liberty of asking one final question to kind of sum things up that again emerged from a theme from questions that we got. Rebecca, you mentioned Governor Dayton's ambitious goal of 25% improvement in water quality by 2025. That's one possible answer to the question, what would success look like? And I wonder if each of you could respond to that, not only in terms of the endpoint, the final outcome, but what would success look like in terms of the changes we would see to get there?
One of the posters that I talked with Anna about was her poster looking at sediment contributions in the Minnesota River and certain watersheds within the Minnesota River. And I think if we can have enough research and information to establish, what are the goals that we need to attain to protect and restore our water resources, and then that gives us the place to shoot for. Then we know kind of where we need to go and where we need to go, and then we can figure out how we get there, is I think ultimately what I would be a dream of mine, that's what success would look like. We're able in this time step to establish what our long-term goals are, and then work collectively to get there. That would be success, because we're charting the path.
And I think each agency probably, brings a different perspective. I think from the Board of Water and Soil Resources perspective, we would look at success is that we have watershed plans completed by 2025, and we're able to show that each of those plans are making measurable progress towards the goals for sediment reduction or whatever it might be actually happening. And I think that ability to, again, demonstrate progress towards a goal is the optimistic way to look at things, and will provide the assurances, I think, to both the citizens of the state when and if that constitutional amendment is put back in front of them, but also I think to our legislative body to show that the investments are being well spent and are capable of achieving measurable results in communities across the state of Minnesota.
There's a quote that my plant breeder professors over on the CFANS campus used to say from Alice in the Looking Glass, and I'm gonna not be able to remember it completely, but it's like you have to keep running as fast as you can just to stay in the same place. And so I think, one aspect of success is gonna be to maintain the protection of the, water quality bodies of water that we enjoy currently. From the Department of Ag perspective, I think that success for us will look like, some of these like private lands being managed in a way that protects water quality, and that being done in a way that the ecosystem services that farmers provide are compensated for, or are, are compensated for, and it's an economic model that works for them.
So, as a public health practitioner, public health is very fond of establishing grand goals, such as Health for All by the year 2000, or Healthy People 2020, or 2030. And so I think success for drinking water would be achieving the Minnesota Department of Health vision for public health, which is that all communities would be thriving and all people would have access to affordable, safe drinking water for drinking, obviously, but also for recreational uses. And that people are also embracing an ethic about water that would ensure its proper stewardship all across the state. It's a grand vision, and I think we would measure that by implementing ways to to assess our progress towards that goal at, at important time points, like 5 years, 10 years, and so on. But, to Rebecca's point, we do need to kind of think about like a, kind of a moonshot type of a, huge, ambitious goal there. And I think it's, clean, safe, affordable water for all.
Success can be looked in so many different ways. I mean, all this time hearing from my colleagues here is a lot of them. One of the ones I thought of is bending the curve. If we're on a trajectory right now of poor water quality, for example, can we bend the curve? And so would I look out not 5 years, but 10 years, but 20 to 30 years out, have we really changed the amount of water or the areas where water quality has been improved? Can we see a bend in the curve? And so are we starting to slow that and start to turn it the other way? We have lots of areas in the state where we have really good water quality. We want to maintain that. So that would be number one. A success is that those high water quality areas are maintained. And the second, the areas where we have impairments, can we bend the curve?
Well, thank you all again for this discussion and this engaging conversation. I've enjoyed it and learned a lot from you. I would now like to invite Professor Kalo back to the podium, and he's been listening and taking notes on this conversation, and is going to offer some summary remarks.
Well, I haven't been taking many notes, but I have been listening hard, and it's been a fascinating conversation and discussion. Learned a lot from it. Very briefly, I think just a few kind of key words, if you like, as thoughts about a summary and synthesis. One of the things that I think I heard was that we've got to move from talking to doing. And there is a lot to be done, and we've got to do that quickly. The system that we're actually trying to manage is a complex system with lots of interacting parts, and where there are inevitably trade-offs, we've got to be able to deal with that complexity and those trade-offs effectively. So it was good to hear that the agencies are interacting in a kind of positive and constructive way to address this integrated system. There are, it seems to me, major challenges, and that's the basis of the Governor's Year of Water action, calling us to action. And the major challenges boil down to at least two fundamental ones. One is concerned with non-point source contamination, pollution. And the other is concerned with aging infrastructure. To address both of them, it seems to me, we're going to have to develop, and we heard about this, economic approaches, which are innovative economic approaches, so that we take our joint responsibilities for this important joint resource. And that, I remind you, is the theme of today's presentation: shared water, shared responsibility. We all have a responsibility. And I think in terms of taking that responsibility, it will be important for us to, and this came out very clearly in the discussions time and time again, for us to be able to persuade people that there is value in that shared resource that we need to take seriously and protect. So thank you again to the panel for drawing all these threads together, and I hope the conversation continues from here to action. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And before I let all of you go, I just need to make sure to say thank you to a couple more people. Just thank the committee, the students, and everyone, faculty. You saw their faces at the doorway down below here, putting this all together. The students couldn't do it by themselves. And we want to thank the Water Resources Center and the Center for Science, Technology, and Environmental Policy, as well as the CFANS Graduate Student Board for sponsoring the event. And thank you all again for coming. And students with posters, the announcement for this closing is grab your posters as quickly as possible. They have to take our poster boards away. So make sure you do that as quickly as you can. So everyone drive safely and have a great night. Thanks for coming.